Mr. Crawford, I am Catherine Mueller. I come from Germany for to work. Daniel Crawford winced at the broken English, at the accent that mangled each word. He stood beside the stage depot, hat in hand, watching Tom grin like a fool while this stranger, descended the wooden steps with careful dignity. Late October had painted the Wyoming prairie in shades of brown and gold, but the afternoon held an edge of cold that promised harder days ahead. She was older than he'd expected, mid-40s, perhaps, with plain features that spoke of hard seasons and harder work. Her dress was practical wool, dark blue and showing its age. Calloused hands gripped a worn leather trunk. Everything about her whispered desperation, or so Daniel told himself. "Ma'am," he managed, his voice flat as the horizon. Tom stepped forward, still beaming. "Mrs. Mueller, welcome to Wyoming. The journey from Cheyenne wasn't too rough. I hope is long." Catherine's eyes moved past them both, studying the ranch buildings visible in the distance. "But I have seen worse." Daniel watched her assess his property with what he read as calculation, sizing up what she'd gotten herself into, wondering if this bargain she'd made mail-order bride to a widowed rancher she'd never met might prove worse than whatever she'd fled in Germany. The thought didn't soften him. He hadn't asked for this. Tom had written the letters, placed the advertisement biz, arranged the whole mess without consulting him properly. "Let me help with your trunk," Tom said, reaching for it. "I can carry." Catherine's grip didn't loosen. Daniel finally spoke. "Tom will load it. I'll bring the wagon around." He turned before she could reply, his boots kicking up dust as he walked toward where the horses waited. Behind him, he heard Tom's cheerful voice explaining the ride to the ranch, heard Catherine's short responses. She spoke little. That, at least, was something. The ranch showed 2 years of bachelor neglect. Daniel knew it, even if he couldn't bring himself to care. The house needed paint. The kitchen garden had gone to weeds. Sarah's flowers, the ones she'd tended so carefully, were long dead. He'd kept the barn in good order, the fences mended, the cattle healthy. That was what mattered. A man didn't need more. An empty water bucket sat beside the well as they arrived. Daniel walked past it without stopping. Carrying Catherine's trunk toward the small house, she followed in silence, her eyes taking in everything: the overgrown garden, the dusty windows, the chimney that needed repointing. "Your room is there." He pointed to the small addition off the main house. "Supper's at 6. Tom and the hands eat in the bunkhouse, but you'll take meals in the kitchen." "Thank you." She stepped past him into the dim room. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window facing east. Nothing more needed. Daniel left her there. He had work to do. Cattle to check before the light failed. Whatever Tom thought this arrangement would accomplish: companionship, help around the house, some cure for loneliness. Daniel wanted no part of it. He'd agreed only because Tom had worn him down with weeks of pestering. Now he regretted even that small surrender. At dusk, he returned to find the bucket filled. Catherine had hauled water from the well, though he'd said nothing about it being her duty. She'd even watered what remained of the kitchen garden, coaxing a few stubborn plants that had somehow survived his neglect. He watched from the barn doorway as she worked. Her movements were efficient, purposeful. She wasted no motion. When she finished, she didn't look toward the house for approval or acknowledgement. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and went inside. Daniel stayed in the barn until full dark, when he finally entered the kitchen. A plate of food sat covered on the table, still warm. He ate alone, tasting nothing, then retreated to his bedroom where Sarah's things remained exactly as she'd left them, her hairbrush on the dresser, her shawl draped over the chair, through the thin wall. He heard nothing from Catherine's room. No crying, no sounds of distress, just silence. Good, he thought. She understood how things were. This was a transaction, nothing more. She'd come for security, for escape from whatever poverty or shame had driven her across an ocean. He'd gotten help with the house because Tom insisted he needed it. They owed each other nothing beyond that. He fell asleep telling himself he'd made that clear enough. The first week taught Daniel that Catherine Mueller asked for nothing and offered everything he didn't want. She rose before dawn. He heard her moving in the kitchen while darkness still held the prairie. By the time he emerged, Coffee was ready and breakfast laid out. Biscuits, bacon, eggs fried in butter, the kind of meal he hadn't bothered making for himself in 2 years. He ate without comment, then left for the day's work. When he returned that evening, the kitchen had been transformed. She'd scrubbed surfaces he'd forgotten could shine, organized shelves that had devolved into chaos, mended the torn curtains that had hung askew since a windstorm the previous spring. The house smelled of lye soap and bread. "You didn't need to do all this, kid," he said. Catherine looked up from where she was peeling potatoes. "A house should be clean." "It was fine." She said nothing to that. Just returned to her work with those efficient movements that somehow made him feel slovenly. The next day, she reorganized the root cellar. Daniel discovered this when he went to retrieve a jar of preserves and found everything rearranged. Potatoes separated from onions, shelves labeled in her careful handwriting, everything positioned for maximum airflow and minimum rot. "In Germany," she said when he confronted her, "we keep potatoes different way, last longer, no waste. We've managed fine without German methods. You have waste. I see the rot in corner is fixable." Her matter-of-fact tone irritated him more than argument would have. She didn't defend herself, didn't plead her case. She simply stated facts as she saw them, then went back to work. Tom and the other hands, Jesse and Frank, took to her immediately. They praised her cooking, thanked her for mending their shirts, appreciated how she kept the bunkhouse supplied with clean linens at meals. They asked about Germany, about her journey, about her life before Wyoming. Catherine answered in her broken English, sharing small pieces of herself. She'd grown up on a farm, learned to work from her father, a wheelwright who also kept livestock, married young, lost her husband to influenza. Daniel listened without appearing to, learning things about her while pretending not to care. She never mentioned children. That absence spoke its own story. Sarah's belongings remained untouched throughout the house, her sewing basket in the corner, her books on the shelf, her good china in the cupboard. Catherine navigated around these shrines without comment, cleaning everything except the things that had been Sarah's. She seemed to understand without being told that those were sacred ground. One evening, as she set the table, she paused at the china cabinet. "Your wife. She had good taste." It was the first time she'd mentioned Sarah directly. "Yes." The word came out harder than he'd intended. Catherine simply nodded and moved on. The bucket appeared daily in her routine. She filled it each morning. Weren't the garden she was coaxing back to life, carried water for cooking and cleaning. Small acts of care that Daniel tried not to notice. He didn't want to see her competence, didn't want to acknowledge how the house was becoming a home again under her quiet management. At supper one night, Tom couldn't contain himself. "Mrs. Mueller, this is the best pie I've had since my mother's. What's your secret?" Catherine smiled a small expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Is no secret, just butter and patience." The hands laughed. Daniel ate in silence, then excused himself early. He heard their continued conversation as he retreated to his room, Catherine's voice mixing with Tom's warmth, Jesse's jokes, Frank's shy questions. They were building something, a small community around the kitchen table. He wanted no part of it. That night, lying in bed, he heard Catherine moving in the kitchen, not working, just walking. He imagined her standing at the window, looking out at this strange landscape so different from Germany, wondering what she'd gotten herself into, wondering if the loneliness was worth the security. The thought stirred something uncomfortably close to empathy. He crushed it quickly. She'd made her choice. He'd made his. That was all there was to it. The next morning, he watched her fill the bucket and tend the garden. She moved with purpose, never hurrying, never hesitating. When she finished, she carried the bucket back to its place by the well and went inside without looking toward where he stood. It occurred to Daniel that she might be watching him too, measuring him just as he measured her, seeing past his cold formality to the grief that armored him. The thought unsettled him more than her competence ever could. The first hard frost came in early November, killing what remained of the kitchen garden overnight. Daniel found Catherine at dawn, harvesting what could be saved, the last squash, stubborn carrots, herbs that had survived in the sheltered corner. Her breath plumed white in the cold air. "Winter's coming," he said. obvious words, but she nodded as if he'd said something profound. Yes. Bad winter. They're all bad here. Catherine straightened, studying the sky with an intensity that puzzled him. Low clouds the color of old iron. Wind from the northwest carrying a bite that promised worse to come. She watched the chickens hunched in their coop, the way the horses stood restless in the corral. Very bad, she repeated. Worse than you know. Daniel felt irritation rise. I've ranched here 15 years. I know Wyoming winters. She didn't argue, just carried her basket of salvaged vegetables inside. Later that morning, she found Tom in the barn. We need windbreaks, she told him, for the cattle, and move supplies closer to house. Cut extra firewood, much extra. Tom glanced at Daniel, who was within earshot. The boss hasn't said anything about, I am saying. Catherine's voice held quiet authority. Storm is coming, big storm. We must prepare. Tom brought it to Daniel at midday. Mrs. Mueller thinks we should build some windbreaks. Says there's a bad storm coming. She's been here 3 weeks and thinks she knows our weather. Daniel shook his head. The cattle are fine where they are. We've got supplies enough. She's jumping at shadows. She seemed pretty certain. She's German. They probably prepare for every little snowfall like it's the end of the world. Tom didn't press further, but Daniel saw him later helping Catherine reinforce the chicken coop, watched her organize the root cellar with even greater precision, saw her drying herbs with urgent efficiency, cutting and bundling like she was running out of time. That evening, she tried one more time. Mr. Crawford, I have seen winter like this before. The animals know. The sky knows. Please. I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Mueller, but I've handled 17 Wyoming winters without German advice. Something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, something older and sadder. My husband also did not listen, she said quietly. The winter of '82 in Bavaria, very cold. I told him bring the herd close, build shelter. He said he knew better. She paused. We lost half our cattle. It was beginning of end for our farm. The story hung between them. Daniel heard the weight of it, the loss, the stubbornness, the consequences. He should have felt sympathy. Instead, he felt defensive. This isn't Bavaria. No, his Wyoming is worse. She turned away before he could respond. Through the window, he watched her continue her preparations, every action deliberate. Every choice made with certainty he couldn't shake even as he dismissed it. The bucket became a point of mockery in his mind. She filled it constantly, stored water in every available container. He found himself making a joke of it to Jessie. Afraid we'll run dry, Mrs. Mueller. She'd looked at him with those steady eyes. No, Mr. Crawford, afraid you will not listen. The first significant snow fell 3 days later, just a few inches. Nothing unusual, but Daniel's cattle, which had grazed contentedly in the near pasture for weeks, suddenly scattered toward the far range. He rode out in the afternoon to turn them back, but they fought him. Driven by some instinct he didn't understand, they pushed toward distant ground. By the time he returned, exhausted and frustrated, night had fallen. Catherine had supper ready. She said nothing about the cattle, asked no questions, just served the meal and cleaned up after. But when Daniel looked out the window before bed, he saw her standing in the yard, staring at the northern horizon. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since sunset. The wind had shifted, carrying a smell like iron and ice. She stood there for a long time, motionless as a sentinel. When she finally came inside, Daniel heard her moving through the house, checking windows, testing doors, filling that damned bucket one more time. He lay in bed listening to her preparations and told himself she was overreacting. Told himself 15 years of experience meant more than whatever superstitions she'd brought from Germany. Told himself he knew better. But sleep came slowly. And when it came, his dreams were troubled by winds and Sarah's voice asking why he never learned to listen. The wagon wheel broke on a Tuesday, the iron rim cracking clean through on a patch of rough ground that Daniel had driven over 100 times before. He cursed, examining the damage, a job for the blacksmith in town, which meant a full day lost to travel and repair. Catherine appeared while he was unhitching the team. I can fix, she said. It needs a smith. My father was wheelwright. I know this work. Daniel stepped back, more from surprise than permission. She circled the wheel, running her hands over the brake, assessing with professional certainty. Then she gathered tools from the barn tools Daniel barely knew how to use and set to work. 2 hours later, the wheel was repaired, not perfect, but solid enough to bear weight. She'd heated the iron in a makeshift forge, reshaped the rim, and secured it with a technique Daniel had never seen. The hands gathered to watch the final test when the wheel held under the wagon's full weight. Tom let out a whistle of approval. Where'd you learn that? Mrs. Mueller. My father. I worked with him many years before I marry. Daniel said nothing, accepted the repair without acknowledgement, told himself it was simple luck. 3 days later, 3 head of cattle came down with bloat. Daniel found them in the morning. Bellies distended. Breathing labored. He'd seen it before, usually fatal, always expensive. He was calculating his losses when Catherine appeared with a basket. What are you doing? He demanded. I treat them. There's nothing to treat. They'll be dead by afternoon. She ignored him. From her basket, she produced dried herbs, juniper, fennel, something else he didn't recognize. She made a tea, strong and bitter smelling, and with Tom's help managed to get the mixture into each suffering animal. Daniel expected to find 3 carcasses by evening. Instead, he found 3 cattle grazing normally, the bloating gone. Their breathing easy. He stood staring, unable to credit what he saw. German remedy, Catherine said from behind him. My grandmother teach me. Very old knowledge. They would have recovered on their own. She didn't argue, just walked back toward the house, leaving him with his hollow certainty. The frozen pipes came next, a cold snap in late November that turned the water in the lines to solid ice. Daniel knew what it meant, burst pipes. Costly repairs. Potentially weeks without indoor water. He was preparing to dig up the frozen sections when Catherine stopped him. Wait, I can stop the break. She wrapped the pipes with burlap soaked in hot salt water. Then layered straw over everything. Insulation technique from Germany. She explained. Keep the ice from expanding too fast. Let it melt slowly from outside heat. By the next afternoon, water flowed again. No breaks. No damage. Each small miracle Daniel rationalized away. The wheel would have held anyway. The cattle had mild cases. The pipes weren't frozen as solid as he'd thought. Coincidence. Luck. His own competence carrying the day despite her interference. Tom wasn't buying it. Boss, she saved us a fortune this week. Maybe we should listen when she talks about that storm. It's November. We get storms every November. She seems to know things. Desperate women make do with whatever knowledge they stumble into. Tom's expression hardened. That's not fair. Wasn't meant to be fair. Was meant to be true. He said it loud enough that Catherine, working in the garden, surely heard. Her back stiffened slightly. But she didn't turn. Just kept harvesting the last of the root vegetables she'd coaxed from earth. Daniel had thought exhausted. That evening, Jessie mentioned her story over supper, how she'd lost everything in Germany, husband to influenza, farm to debt collectors, how she'd sold what little remained and bought passage to America rather than beg from relatives. That takes courage, Jessie said. Coming to a strange country alone? Takes desperation, Daniel corrected. The table went quiet. Catherine continued eating, her face expressionless, but her knuckles whitened around her fork. After the hands left, Daniel found himself alone in the kitchen. Through the window, he watched heavy snow begin to fall. The cattle, which had been restless all day, were scattering again toward the far pasture, moving against sense, driven by instincts he couldn't understand. He should ride out, turn them back, keep them close. Instead, he went to bed, exhaustion and stubbornness winning over judgment. Tomorrow would be soon enough. Tomorrow he'd deal with whatever came. But as he drifted toward sleep, Catherine's words echoed, afraid you will not listen, and the wind, rising outside his window, seemed to carry agreement. The power went out on a Saturday night, a line down somewhere between the ranch and town, plunging the house into darkness. Daniel fumbled for matches, found the lantern, Discovered they were nearly out of oil, enough for an hour, maybe 2. "We use fireplace, Catherine said from the doorway. "Save the oil." They settled in the kitchen, the only room with a hearth large enough to provide both warmth and light. Firelight played across the walls, soft and intimate. Daniel sat at the table while Catherine prepared tea, something herbal, fragrant in a way that reminded him of Sarah's garden in summer. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, but waited. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, flames crackled and sparked. "Your wife," Catherine said finally. "What was her name?" The question startled him. No one asked directly anymore. They spoke around Sarah, avoided her name like it might summon grief. "Sarah is beautiful name." Catherine poured tea, set a cup before him. "How long ago?" 2 years, November. Same time I lose Carl. 2 years ago this month." The parallel settled over them. 2 widowed people. 2 years of grief, sitting in firelight measuring their losses. She died in childbirth. Daniel heard himself say, "The baby with her, a son," words he hadn't spoken aloud since the funeral. Doctor said there were complications, said she bled too much, said there was nothing. His voice caught. Catherine said nothing, just sat with his pain, her silence more comforting than any platitude could have been. "Carl was sick 3 days," she said after a while. "Influenza. Strong man, never sick before. I make him tea, keep him warm, pray to God. On 3rd day, he cannot breathe. I hold his hand while he—" She trailed off. "After, the debt collectors come. The farm was already failing. Without Carl, I cannot keep it. They take everything, the house, the land, the animals. Leave me with nothing. I'm sorry. I have choice then. Beg from Carl's brother, who never liked me, or take what little money I have to buy passage to America. Start new." She met his eyes. "Everyone say I am foolish, say I am desperate, but I know truth. Grief is heavy bucket. You carry alone, or you share weight." The metaphor hung between them. Daniel thought of the bucket by the well, the one she filled daily, the one he'd mocked. "I've been carrying alone," he admitted. "Yes, I see this." Her voice held no judgment. "You are afraid. Fear make you small, make you push away help." He wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but in the firelight, with exhaustion stripping away pretense, he couldn't find the words. They sat in silence for a while longer. Outside, the wind grew stronger. "We should get water," Catherine said, "before it is too dark." They went out together, each carrying a bucket. The well was only 30 yards from the house, but the wind made it feel like miles. They worked without speaking, Daniel lowering the bucket while Catherine held the rope steady, then reversing, her lowering while he braced. Partnership born of necessity. When they came inside, arms aching from the weight, Daniel realized something had shifted. Not forgiveness. Nothing so simple, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He looked at Catherine in the firelight, really looked, not at her plain features or her broken English or the age that marked her face, but at her strength, her competence, her choice to build rather than surrender. Not desperate, he thought. Brave. The realization unsettled him more than her competence ever had. They said goodnight at their separate doors. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the foundations of his certainty beginning to crack. Sarah's things surrounded him, her brush, her shawl, her memory. But for the first time in 2 years, he wondered if holding on to grief so tightly meant refusing the possibility of anything else. Outside, the wind howled, growing stronger with each passing hour. Catherine had been right. The storm was coming, and Daniel, for all his 15 years of experience, had no idea what it would cost him. The storm hit before dawn on Sunday, arriving with a violence that made previous Wyoming winters seem gentle by comparison. Daniel woke to wind that shook the house and snow so thick it turned the world white. He dressed quickly, knowing what needed doing. Secure the barn, check the animals, bring the cattle close while there was still time. All the things he should have done when Catherine warned him. The hands were already working when he reached the barn. Tom's face was grim. Cattle scattered toward the far range. We'll never get them back in this. We have to try. They tried, for 3 hours. They pushed through waist-deep snow and wind that felt like knives, found some of the herd. Lost them again in the whiteout, nearly lost Frank when his horse stumbled into a hidden wash. By mid-morning, Daniel called them back. Too dangerous. They'd have to wait out the storm and count losses after. The windbreaks Catherine had suggested, the ones he'd refused, would have made all the difference. The close pasture she'd wanted, where they could have kept the herd safe, mocked him with its emptiness. Inside the barn, they assessed damage: 2 horses with frostbite, feed supplies scattered by wind through a door that hadn't been properly secured, the milk cow dry from stress. Everything Catherine had warned against, happening exactly as she'd predicted. "We need to organize what we have, Tom said. "Ration it properly." Daniel nodded. Too exhausted to speak, his chest ached, had been aching since the 2nd hour in the storm. But he'd pushed through. Now it felt like someone had wrapped iron bands around his ribs. The next 2 days blurred. The storm didn't relent, if anything. It worsened. Temperature dropped below 0. Snow piled into drifts that covered the windows. Daniel pushed himself past exhaustion, trying to fix mistakes with sheer will and stubbornness. By the 3rd day, he couldn't hide the cough anymore, deep and rattling, bringing up things he didn't want to see. Tom noticed first. "Boss, you need to rest." "I'm fine." "You're sick." Daniel tried to argue but was seized by coughing that doubled him over. When it passed, Tom was staring at him with worry that bordered on fear. "It's just a cold." "That's not a cold. That's—" He didn't finish because Daniel collapsed, one moment standing, the next crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. Tom caught him before he hit the ground. The hands carried him to the house through snow that fought every step. Catherine met them at the door, took one look at Daniel's gray face and fever-bright eyes, and took command. "His room, now." "Mrs. Mueller, should we—" "You listen to me now." Her voice cut through Tom's uncertainty. "Do exactly what I say. No questions. We have much work to save him in this ranch." Tom had never heard her speak with such authority. Neither had Daniel, drifting in and out of consciousness. But he heard it now, the voice of a woman who had survived worse than this storm, who knew what needed doing and wouldn't waste time with doubt. "Jesse, keep the fires burning. Frank, inventory all food and feed. Tom, you help me with him." They obeyed without question. Catherine worked through that night and the next, managing 2 crises at once. Daniel's pneumonia required constant care teas made from herbs she'd dried, poultices on his chest, vigilant monitoring of his fever. The ranch required strategic organization supplies rationed with Germanic precision, emergency windbreaks built from barn wood, feeding stations established to draw surviving cattle close. She didn't sleep. Tom caught her at dawn on the 4th day, swaying on her feet in the kitchen. "Mrs. Mueller, you need rest." "After." She mixed another batch of herbs. "First we save what can be saved." Daniel burned with fever, lost in dreams where Sarah's face merged with Catherine's, both asking the same question. "Why won't you let anyone help you? Why do you measure worth by what you see?" He tried to answer but couldn't find words, tried to explain his grief, his pride, his fear of being vulnerable again. But explanation dissolved into fever confusion, and he was falling into darkness where an empty bucket waited impossibly deep. Representing 2 years of loneliness he'd wrapped around himself like armor. In his few lucid moments, he heard Catherine moving through the house, her footsteps steady, purposeful, the sound of someone who refused to surrender even when every reasonable person would. The storm lasted 6 days. On the 7th, it broke. Daniel's fever broke with it. He woke to find Catherine asleep in the chair beside his bed. She was still wearing the same dress she'd had on when the storm started, now stained with medicine and exhaustion. Her face was drawn, her hands raw from work. But she'd stayed. Through his illness and her exhaustion, she'd stayed. Daniel lay still, not wanting to wake her, watching her sleep in understanding. Finally, what he'd refused to see before. This woman, plain, foreign, speaking broken English, had saved his life. was still saving it, even in sleep, simply by being there. Outside, the storm's silence felt like judgment. Catherine woke to find Daniel watching her. For a moment, neither spoke. "How long?" His voice was rough, barely recognizable. 6 days since storm start, 3 since your fever worst. She stood, checking his forehead with practiced efficiency. "Better now. You will live." "The ranch is managed. Tom and Hans follow my instruction. We save what we can." He wanted details but was too weak to press. Catherine brought broth, helped him sit up enough to drink. The simple act of swallowing exhausted him. He slept again, waking hours later to twilight and the sound of men's voices outside. Over the next 2 days, Daniel drifted between sleep and waking. Each time he surfaced, Catherine was there or nearby. She changed poultices on his chest mustard and herbs that burned and smelled foreign but seemed to loosen the terrible tightness in his lungs, made him drink teas that tasted like medicine and earth, watched him with those steady eyes that missed nothing. In his fever dreams, the story of his pride played out in fragments. He saw himself dismissing Catherine's warnings, saw the cattle scattering because he'd refused to keep them close, saw the ranch struggling because he'd been too stubborn to prepare. Every choice traced back to the same root: his inability to see past surface to substance. The empty bucket appeared again in his dreams, but this time it was filling slowly, drop by drop. Each drop a moment he'd dismissed Catherine's competence, each drop his guilt accumulating. By the time the bucket overflowed, Daniel was drowning in recognition of his own blindness. He woke gasping, Catherine's hand on his shoulder. "His only dream. You are safe." "I wasn't." He stopped, unsure how to explain. She seemed to understand anyway. "Fever makes us see truth we hide from when we are well." "What truth?" "You know already, is why you dream of it." She was right. He did know. But admitting it required strength he didn't yet possess. On the 8th day, Daniel was well enough to sit up, to take solid food, to ask real questions. Catherine sat beside his bed, her exhaustion evident in every line of her face. "The cattle, we lose some, maybe 20 head, but most survive. Your neighbors lose much more. I hear Tom talking to Mr. Henderson from North Ranch. He lose half his herd." 20 head instead of half, the difference between Catherine's preparation and his stubbornness. "The supplies. We have enough for winter. I ration careful. Jesse complain about beans, but we will not starve. The hands, they listen to you. They listen because they see I know what I do, even when you do not see it." No accusation in her voice, just fact. Daniel looked at her, really looked, saw the raw hands from days of brutal work, the shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights, the stains on her dress from medicine and care. Every mark was evidence of what she'd done while he lay helpless. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. Why? What? Why save me after everything He couldn't finish. "After how I treated you felt too enormous to speak aloud." Catherine tilted her head, studying him. "You think I do this for you?" The question surprised him. "I do this because it's right thing to do, because ranch needs someone to make decision when you cannot, because the hands are good men who deserve not to starve for your pride." She paused. "And yes, do it for you also, because under the fear and grief, you are not bad man, just hurt man who forget how to accept help." Her honesty cut deeper than accusation would have. "I didn't see you, Daniel admitted. "I saw what I expected, desperate woman. Plain, foreign. I didn't see your strength." "No, you did not see. But now..." She gestured toward the window where weak winter sunlight filtered through. "Now you see. The question is what you do with seeing." She left him then, to rest and to think. Daniel lay in bed, staring at Sarah's things scattered around the room, her brush, her shawl, her books. He'd made a shrine of their bedroom, preserving everything exactly as she'd left it, holding on to grief so tightly he'd refused to let anything or anyone else in. Sarah would have hated it. She'd always been practical, forward-looking, would have told him to move on, to live, to let someone help carry the weight, would have liked Catherine. he realized, would have recognized her immediately as someone worth knowing. The thought brought fresh grief, but different this time. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the gentler ache of understanding what he'd wasted through stubbornness. Outside, he heard Catherine organizing the evening meal, her voice mixing with Tom's, giving instructions in her broken English that somehow conveyed absolute authority. The hands obeyed without question because they'd seen what Daniel had refused to acknowledge. Competence transcends grammar, and worth has nothing to do with appearance or origin. He'd learned that truth the hardest way possible by nearly dying while a woman he'd judged harshly saved everything he'd almost lost. The empty bucket of his dreams had finally filled, not with guilt, but with recognition, and that recognition, painful as it was, felt like the first honest thing he'd allowed himself to feel in 2 years. Daniel was on his feet by day 10, weak but determined. Catherine watched him shuffle to the kitchen table like she watched everything with quiet assessment and minimal comment. "You should rest more." "I've rested enough." He lowered himself carefully into the chair. "I need to see what happened." Tom came in from morning chores, stamping snow from his boots. His face broke into relief seeing Daniel upright. "Boss, good to see you vertical." "Tom, tell me," over coffee. Tom laid out the accounting. 23 head of cattle lost scattered to the far range. Frozen in the storm, the Crawford ranch was still intact, functional, positioned to survive the rest of winter. Henderson lost 64 head, practically his whole herd. Tom said. Morrison lost half, even old Peterson, who's been ranching here longer than anyone, lost 40%. He paused. "We did better than everyone because of Mrs. Mueller." The words hung there. Undeniable truth. She built windbreaks from barn scrap, set up feeding stations that drew the cattle close, organized the supplies so we won't run out before spring, and she did it all while nursing you through the worst pneumonia I've ever seen. Daniel absorbed this. Each detail was another mark against his earlier judgment. The hands fed an healthy basi, following her instructions without question. Jesse actually apologized to her yesterday for complaining about beans. Tom grinned. That's how you know things are different. After Tom left, Daniel found Catherine outside, filling water buckets at the well, the same task she'd done every day since arriving, the same task he'd once mocked. He walked slowly, his strength not yet returned. She glanced up as he approached but didn't stop working. "You should be inside," she said. "I needed to see you." She set down the bucket, waited. "I need to—" Daniel struggled for words. "What you did, saving the ranch, saving me. I can't. I did what was necessary. Nothing more. It was everything more." He gestured at the ranch around them. "Without you, I'd have lost it all. The cattle, the hands, my life, everything." Catherine's expression didn't soften. "You would not need saving if you had listened when I first speak, if you had not judged me by my English and my face." The words struck like a physical blow, true and unarguable. "You're right. I judged you by what I could see. And I was blind, completely blind. Yes." She picked up the bucket again. "You see outside. I see inside. I knew you were afraid, afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to need help. Fear makes people small. Mr. Crawford makes them push away what they need most." He'd never heard such direct truth spoken to him. Not even from Sarah. It should have made him defensive. Instead, it felt like absolution. "What can I do to get to what to make up for treating me like I am nothing?" Catherine shook her head. "You cannot erase what you do, can only choose different going forward. Then tell me what you want, what you need from me." She studied him for a long moment. "I need nothing from you, Mr. Crawford. I survived without your approval before. I survive without it again." She paused. "But partnership, that I would accept. Partnership, equal partnership. You stop seeing me as desperate woman who come begging. I stop seeing you as stubborn man too proud to learn. We work together, make ranch better together, share the weight instead of carrying alone." She met his eyes. "That is what I want. Nothing less." Daniel heard the steel in her voice. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or offering it. She was stating terms. "Yes," he said. "Partnership, equals. Catherine nodded once, picked up one bucket while he reached for the other. They walked back to the house together, each carrying their load, equal weight, shared burden, at the door. Tom appeared with news that neighbors were gathering at the Morrison Ranch to share resources and plan for the rest of winter. Catherine should come, he said. Her strategies had saved the Crawford Ranch. Others wanted to learn. Daniel watched her prepare, changing into her better dress, gathering her notes on feed rationing and windbreak construction. She moved with quiet confidence, not seeking attention but not hiding her competence either. "I'll come too," he said. She looked surprised. "You are still weak. I'm strong enough to tell them the truth, that you saved this ranch, that I was too stubborn to listen, that everyone should adopt your methods." Something shifted in Catherine's expression. Not forgiveness, still too early for that, but acknowledgement. At the Morrison Ranch, 15 neighboring ranchers had gathered. Daniel stood before them, still shaky but determined. "Most of you know I lost 23 head in the storm. Some of you lost much more." Nods around the room. "What you don't know is I should have lost everything. Would have. Except Mrs. Mueller saw the storm coming, warned me, told me how to prepare." He paused, making sure everyone heard what came next. "I didn't listen, too proud, too certain I knew better. She prepared anyway, and when I got sick, she managed the whole ranch, built windbreaks, organized feeding stations, rationed supplies. Everything I should have done if I'd had the sense to see past my own stubbornness." Catherine stood beside him, listening to him publicly acknowledge what he'd privately refused for weeks. Mrs. Mueller learned these strategies in Germany. Hard winters, practical solutions. She's offered to share them with anyone interested. The next hour, Catherine explained her methods to ranchers who'd lost fortunes in the storm. She spoke in her broken English. But no one cared about grammar when she was describing how to save cattle. They took notes, asked questions, treated her with the respect Daniel should have shown from the beginning. On the ride home, they sat in silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Thank you for not making me more of a fool than I already was." "You make yourself fool," Catherine said. "I just give you chance to be better." At the ranch, they stood by the well one more time. 2 buckets, both full. "Partnership," Daniel repeated. "I want to learn from you, if you'll teach me." Catherine smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "We teach each other. That is what partnership means." They carried the buckets inside together, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel felt something other than grief filling the emptiness. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or simply the beginning of seeing clearly. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it brought transformation. The Crawford Ranch had survived winter better than any property in 3 counties. Word spread about Catherine's strategies, and neighboring ranchers adopted her methods. By March, she'd become an unexpected authority on cold weather livestock management, teaching techniques she'd learned from her father and grandfather to men who'd ranched Wyoming for decades. Daniel watched her teach with something close to wonder. She stood in the Morrison barn, explaining windbreak construction to 15 ranchers who took notes like schoolboys. Her broken English no longer sounded foreign, just distinct, uniquely her. The words that had once made him wince now carried authority he couldn't help but respect. Their partnership had developed slowly through winter. Shared meals where they discussed ranch management, evening conversations about Germany and Wyoming, finding unexpected common ground. Work done side by side, each contributing what they knew best. Affection had grown naturally from respect. Daniel found himself noticing small things, how Catherine hummed while cooking, the way she paused to watch snowfall, her careful precision with everything she touched. She noticed him too, he realized. Saw past his grief to the man he'd been before less hardened him. One evening in late February, working together to repair fence, Catherine had asked about Sarah. She was good woman, the best I knew, strong, practical. She'd have liked you. You think so? I know so. She wouldn't have tolerated my stubbornness either. Catherine had smiled at that. Then we would be friends. Perhaps. The thought had settled something in Daniel. Permission. Maybe. To honor Sarah's memory while building something new. In March, sitting at the kitchen table over coffee. He'd asked the question that had been forming for weeks. "Would you marry me?" Catherine had set down her cup carefully. "Why, you ask?" "Because I want partnership to be permanent. Because I respect you. Because—" He'd stumbled over the next words but forced them out. "Because I'm falling in love with you, the real you. Not desperate woman I invented in my head, but the strong, capable person you actually are." Love, she'd tested the word, is big thing to say. "I know, and I know I don't deserve say it on stop." She'd reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Is not about deserve, is about choose. I choose to stay or I choose to leave. You choose to see me or choose to stay blind. We both choose what we build together." "Then what do you choose?" "I choose partnership. I choose to build new life here, with you, if we build as equals." She'd paused. "If you ask me as equal, not as man who saved desperate woman, then yes, I marry you." They'd married in March on the first truly warm day of spring. Simple ceremony. Tom officiating. The hands witnessing. Neighbors gathered to celebrate. Catherine wore a simple blue dress. Daniel wore his best shirt. Cleaned and pressed with care. The vows were traditional, but the meaning felt revolutionary. Two wounded people choosing partnership over isolation. Two survivors building something new from the wreckage of their individual pasts. Now, in early April, they stood together at the well where everything had begun. Spring planting was underway. Catherine was teaching the hands German preservation techniques while Daniel worked on expanding the windbreak system. "Mr. Crawford," she still called him that sometimes, half teasing. "Mrs. Crawford," he responded. The name still new enough to bring a smile. "The bucket is empty." He looked at where it sat, the same bucket that had marked their journey from judgment to partnership. Empty again, but not from neglect, simply waiting to be filled. They filled it together, both hands on the rope, pulled up water that caught the morning light, turned it golden, carried it between them to the garden where new shoots were already breaking through earth that had seemed barren months before. Catherine knelt beside the plants, unerring with practiced care. Daniel knelt beside her, learning the technique she'd tried to teach him months ago when he'd been too proud to listen. "You are better at this now," she said. "I have a good teacher." She smiled the smile that had become familiar, that he looked forward to earning. "We both do. We teach each other." The hands were arriving for the day's work. Catherine stood, wiping dirt from her hands, ready to oversee planting with the same competence she'd brought to everything. Daniel stood beside her, no longer threatened by her strength but grateful for it. "Is good life," Catherine said, surveying the ranch, not a question, a statement. "Yes," Daniel agreed. "It is. Not perfect. They still had hard moments, misunderstandings, old fears surfacing, the occasional clash of stubborn wills, but they faced them together, as partners, sharing weight instead of carrying alone. The morning sun warmed the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Spring wind carried the smell of earth waking. Catherine spoke in her broken English, the accent that had once seemed like a mark against her, now simply her voice. "This ranch, our home now." Daniel agreed. "Our home, equal partners." She picked up one bucket, he picked up the other. They walked to the house together, ready for the day's work, ready for whatever came next, and the buckets, which had been empty when everything began, were full.